I have some more news from that side of the aisle. You want to set this one up, Emily?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene has called for a national divorce using that exact language. She was sort of mocked for this tweet yesterday. This is the quote: "We need a national divorce. We need to separate by red states and blue states and shrink the federal government." Everyone I talk to says this, from the sick and it's like Trump, right? Many people are saying, from the sick and disgusting woke culture issue shoved down our throats to the Democrats' traitorous America Last policies, we are done. We are done. All right. So obviously, somebody with now as much clout in the Republican Party as Marjorie Taylor Greene actually does have. She is in a position right now. I wouldn't have predicted this maybe a couple of years ago, but she is in a position right now where she does genuinely have some clout in the Republican Party. And here she is calling outright for a national divorce. That's why we're covering it here, because it is worth talking about. There have been, on the right especially, some rumblings of this. There always are. By the way, you probably remember this, like going back years. There's always that conversation. There's an interesting point to be made about the fact that we have sort of come apart, to borrow the language from the book Coming Apart, in socioeconomic ways, in that people who are at very different ends of the socioeconomic spectrum are basically living in different worlds within our own country at this point. But that said, Marjorie Taylor Greene's argument falls apart because of her own state. What do you do with Georgia, right? I mean, seriously, a purple state like Georgia.
Do you live in a blue state?
Exactly. Exactly. And are your neighbors, who you might get along with fine and who voted for Warnock or who voted for Ossoff, what do you think of them? Do you think they should live in a different country? Do you think that they do live in a different country and it hasn't been formally determined at this point? And so I think it's an opportunity, I think, to really consider the impracticality, not just, I don't mean that like logistically, but just like actually philosophically, it makes no sense. It's an incoherent kind of idea.
I mean, there's a few things to say about this. To me, it feels like a sort of throwing up of your hands and abandonment of any idea of a democratic, small d, democratic nation, where, okay, you disagree with whatever the Biden administration is doing, there's going to be another election. Like, that's the whole idea is, okay, we have this push and pull, and yeah, the country has different ideas about exactly how we should accomplish it. That's why we have a democracy, where you appoint representatives and where you elect representatives and where you run on a platform and you make your case for your ideas, and may the best ideas win. That's the whole idea of what we're doing here. That's number one. Number two is, I mean, part of why I wanted to cover this, because we don't cover the utterances of Marjorie Taylor Greene all that often on this show, is because it's really the polar opposite of the view of the country that we believe in and are trying to promote with this show. I mean, you know, I'm sitting here with you. We have some different ideas about things. Sagar and I have some different ideas about things. And in no world am I like, this is irreconcilable. We must get a national divorce. And I think that the reason the show, I think, has been successful is because that is much more reflective of how people actually live in their normal lives than this like bizarrely fringe, ultra online take of Marjorie Taylor Greene.
It is ultra online.
It's only if you're like okay, she says like everybody I talk to says this. Are you only talking to the worst people on Twitter? Because that's what the view of the world you would get is if you spend way too much time down a rabbit hole on like Twitter or Getter or True Social or whatever your social media of choice happens to be. But if you're actually like existing in the world and living with your neighbors, many of whom may have different ideologies and vote for different politicians than you, like this is not the experience of the country that most people have on a day-to-day basis. I live in a county that is quite conservative and has been for a long time, voted for Donald Trump. I mean, this is where I was born and raised. And again, at no moment have I been like, this is irreconcilable. We need to give up on democracy and just split at the seams. I think it's a very sad and very pessimistic view of the country ultimately.
Yeah, and again, it is true that we are having a hard time agreeing on like very, very, very fundamental questions about for instance, what is gender? What is truth? What is disinformation? What is democracy? Like, we actually are having a hard time coming to terms with those questions. That is not unprecedented in American history. We have had a very hard time determining the value of human beings. There are people who disagreed on that, perhaps the most fundamental question in human existence in this country. And that's not to say that we've handled it perfectly. It's not to say that everything is just peachy and that the United States is the perfect example of how to sort of work through these questions. But it is to say the whole point of what we do, as opposed to what other countries have done in human history, is work through these things and use this tool of constitutional democracy to create a more peaceful existence to the best of our ability. The best of our ability is not always going to be perfect, and it is going to be, sadly, tragic, violent, all of those things. Human existence is tragic and violent and all of those things, but we're working towards a better form of it. And to give up on that,
yeah,
that's really sad.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of people on there who were like, this is treasonous, whatever. She can say what she wants to say, but I do think it's kind of I would say that the sentiment at the core of it is kind of anti-American because of exactly the reasons that you're laying out. It goes against the core of the best notions of what America is supposed to be. Not that we've lived up to it, not that we live up to it today, but again, I find the comments profoundly sad that you would just sort of like give up on the country in this way. And I wasn't the only one. There were lots of Republicans who were not impressed with what she had to say here. This is Spencer Cox, who is the governor of Utah, Republican, in case you are surprised by that. In Utah, obviously, it's Republican. And what he said in response to this is this rhetoric, we can put this up on the screen. Mediaite had a kind of roundup of some of the criticism here. They say she was roundly condemned after calling for a national divorce on Twitter. Spencer Cox, the governor of Utah, said this rhetoric is destructive and wrong and honestly evil. We don't need a divorce. We need marriage counseling. And we need elected leaders that don't profit by tearing us apart. We can disagree without hate. Healthy conflict was critical to our nation's founding and survival. He has a little Reagan quote there. But then I liked what he said here. He said that he doesn't mean just civility and kindness, although we definitely need more of that too. I mean passionate disagreement that does not destroy our souls and our country. Healthy conflict is good and foundational, but we must be Americans first and partisans second or last. And I like the way he phrased that because sometimes these things get just like bound up in decorum and civility politics, which I think is silly. There should be fierce debates. It should be raw. It should be passionate. There is nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But, you know, the idea that, oh, we're just going to give up on the other half of the country that disagrees with me, frankly, I think it's disgusting. No,
and that's such an important distinction because the like nonsense respectability theater that our politicians want to drag us into, which is like, you can't, how dare you say anything that's so critical of the American media or the American government, or you can't criticize our institutions because you're going to sow institutional distrust. Well, first of all, our institutions deserve to be distrusted. And so that's, I think, a distraction, but we should be able to. For instance, I have this long-standing disagreement with most people when they look at the Jon Stewart clip of him laying into Tucker Carlson and Paul Begala on Crossfire.
Yeah.
I forget what year it was, like 2004, somewhere around there.
Somewhere in there.
I don't think that was a great moment because I think what we lose when we take away that sort of public example of debate, heated debate, intense debate, but where you have two representatives, and it's important that they do actually represent both sides of the argument and they do it well, butting heads in public on television. I think that's a cathartic and important thing for Americans to be able to do and for Americans to be able to see. It's part of why this show works so well and that you and Sagar have always worked so well. It's because people do need to be able to see that because we can all do that with each other. And when you lose that and when the corporate press, as they do now, tries to push us away from that and tries to say no purveyors of disinformation or hate or whatever deserve to breathe the same oxygen in our green rooms or get any room in our pages, then this is how you set the stage for the national divorce conversation because people no longer think they can talk through these things because they don't see it happening. Yeah, and it's about, I can't control these other people, so I just have to, like, it's an almost totalitarian instinct, honestly. On the Jon Stewart point,
I think what people are reacting to is how inauthentic that particular debate, how it was just theater.
Cartoonish.
Cartoonish,
Yeah, right.
exactly.
Yeah.
But the core point of having people disagree and like genuinely going at it and battling it out, I think that's the core of what we should all be about. Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Saagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.